I decided to make a two-part series about money because even though each part of this series can't really stand alone without the other, I really don't want to combine the two because it just seems like there's too much conceptual ground to cover, and I don't want to pack it all into a single video. So this is part 1. What is money and what's wrong with it? Money is an abstract ideal which can only be approximated by the contents of your wallet. Money at its essence is merely a symbol. Money has evolved dramatically over the past few centuries, along with financial technology and computing. Money has been transmitted through different physical forms, from patterns stamped onto various precious metals, to ink patterns stamped onto various pieces of paper, to digital information embedded within complex networks of silicon circuits. Money has also been regulated by gradually evolving policies and institutions which regulate its value, its power, its availability, and its authenticity. Over time, as money has become more stable, more secure, more useful and more convenient, and more independent from physical materials, it has been gradually purified. The true essence of money is thus becoming more and more evident with time, even though it still remains partly obscured. So if money is essentially a symbol, then what does money represent? We sometimes say that money represents wealth or value, but these terms, while accurate, are still too vague and inclusive to offer much insight into what it is and how it works. Some might also say that money represents power, or property, or capital, or resources. But I think that these terms are far too specific and tainted with misleading associations. In my opinion, none of these words are adequate to reveal money's true meaning and essence. So what does money represent? In my opinion, money represents a combination of the economic concepts of scarcity and utility. We use money to represent and communicate both the scarcity and the utility of what we trade. Utility is a measure of how good or useful something is, and scarcity is a measure of how difficult it is to obtain something. But this symbol, which combines these two primary meanings, also serves two primary functions. Firstly, it serves as a catalyst for trade. It stimulates trade by providing a universal substitute for what we really want to trade, and thus serving as an artificial resource that everybody needs, a resource which is always scarce and useful by definition. It serves as a universal commodity which paradoxically has no specific use. And secondly, it serves as a motivation for action in the form of punishment and reward, thus incentivizing and organizing human behavior to achieve specific goals. If you talk to a libertarian economist, you will hear about how the profit motive can improve decision-making to maximize efficiency and cooperation and technological innovation. You may have heard of the invisible hand, which was Adam Smith's analogy for how market forces tend to organize and regulate human behavior with minimal dependence on authority or violence. Just to reiterate, money is a mere symbol which represents a combination of two primary qualities, utility and scarcity, and which also serves a combination of two primary functions, stimulating trade and incentivizing behavior. In the past, criminal punishment was more rare and more often restricted to injury, death, imprisonment, and the suspension of rights, freedoms, and privileges. But increasingly, these old-fashioned punishments are being replaced with something deemed much more humane and less severe, and known as the fine. One of my own personal missions, and one of the missions of this channel, is to oppose this addictive tool of punishment, known as the fine. I am anti-fine. I am not fine with fines. Fines are anything but fine. I actually think that a fine is inherently sadistic in a way that the most twisted and bloodthirsty serial killer could never quite match. In my opinion, it is through fines that this dual function of money is being allowed to foster increasing corruption, and this is partly enabled by general confusion about what money really is and how it really works and what it's really good for. Allow me to explain how this dual function of money breeds corruption. Because every transaction has two sides, a buyer and a seller, a giver and a receiver, this then means that whenever we use money as a tool for punishment or reward, we will necessarily also be arbitrarily incentivizing behaviors that we did not intend to incentivize. To make my point more clear, I'll just use an absurd analogy. Suppose that a stranger approaches you and tells you that they consider you to be a very bad person, and that you really deserve to be punished for being such a bad person. So they then tell you that as punishment you should give them $500, at which point you can consider your debt to society to be paid in full. What would you do in that situation? Now suppose that you just so happen to have $500 in your pocket, and suppose that that stranger was pointing a loaded gun to your head. What would you do in that situation? Now let's say that the stranger takes your $500 and burns it right in front of you. Now at least they would have some credibility. But if on the other hand they just ran away with the money and on to their next victim, then it would start to look more like a racketeering operation, wouldn't it? The problem with using money as a form of punishment is that you cannot punish one person without also rewarding someone else, thus creating a sadistic incentive for punishers, with ever-increasing and ever-increasingly unrealistic standards for what is considered moral or legal behavior. If fines are intended not as a reward, but only as punishment, then why do we need to have two sides to the transaction? Knowing what money is and how it works, then why should we need to collect any money from bad people in the first place? I'm going to give an answer to this question in part 2 of this video series, so stay tuned.